It is the last day of the month, and this month feels like it could not have been longer. This is my February wrap-up. I really haven't done a wrap-up in a long time, but because I have this new TBR series going on, I wanted to fill you in on what happened this month, talk about what I did read from that TBR, so that when I do my TBR for March, you will be like, oh my god, she did it, I'm so proud. We're actually going to start with the books that were associated with that TBR first. The first one was The Lessons with the Mothman by Catherine Moon. This was an ebook, and it was from my newly added books to my TBR. I finished with this one and I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. It is a part of a series. It's about a Mothman. It is a monster smut book, so if you're not prepared for that, it's what I read. I gave this a 5 out of 5 stars. It is about a Mothman who is he's very old. Like, he's like a species that becomes very old. And so he is just very irritated that he's never found love. He doesn't understand love. And all of his friends, the ones from previous books in the series, have found love. And so he works for an agency that helps usually humans that have either like certain sexual desires that they can't fulfill, or they just don't want to or can't find a partner. They help them find sexual gratification. So he gets matched up with a woman who is doing a research study on different monster species, and he's like super fascinated because she's super intelligent, and they eventually become a thing. It is very smutty. There's a lot of role play in here, which is usually not something I see in monster romances. It's usually just like the monster romancy part. I don't know, I felt there was a lot of emotional development for once. I feel like sometimes these kind of just are surface level in the emotion department, but I feel like the characters actually grew, which was amazing. I love Catherine Moon as an author, and I feel like the more books I read, the more I just fall in love with her writing. So it was a great experience, and I'm glad that I was able to pick it up. The next one was one of the newer books on my list as well. It was The War of the Worlds. Technically, I think I picked number 4 because I got that one most recently, but I read number 1 in the series, and I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. I am going to potentially continue the series this month. I think I have like 6 volumes. This is kind of telling a totally different story, and there's these weird like spores, like it's more of like a plant thing that's kind of spreading, while there are also these like weird mechanic monster things. Very interesting. I will definitely continue the series. I also read The Secret History of the Rape Kit by Pagan Kennedy. This one I gave a 4 out of 5 stars. This was also from my newer TBR hauled stuff, and it was a nonfiction book, the first nonfiction I've read in probably years, and I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars, which is amazing. I feel like the only thing lacking for me was the fact that it got repetitive at a certain point, which I'll explain. This is a book about our author, Pagan Kennedy, because it's kind of autobiographical at times. She had wanted to figure out the history of the rape kit, who created it, what was the history there, and how it was implemented, and any struggles along the way. And she came across Marty Goddard, who was a woman in Chicago in the 70s, I believe, who had found a way to create this kit and work with hospitals and with the police department in implementation. And it goes over Pagan Kennedy's like personal history with sexual assault and just being a woman and all that entails in being not believed and being constantly doubted by police and by authority figures, because I won't go down that that path right now, but I feel like that's a very common theme, that women are not believed or trusted with whatever. Okay, we're not diving there, but it does go into that quite a lot. You also hear about how Marty kind of gave up her name being on the box for the fact that it would just be out there and exist and be able to help women. I feel like it was mostly started to help women of color and children. Kind of, I keep wanting to spiral into the topic of women not being trusted, but it was also talking about women of color, children, as well as men. It was an overarching, it's supposed to act as a way for sexual assault victims to kind of speak for themselves, and also like be able to have their word be more trusted in court, and kind of find out who did it, hold them responsible. Pretty dark at times, because you are hearing these in-depth stories of sexual assault, as well as like hit with that feeling of being let down a lot by authority figures and people that should be looking out for women's rights. The repetition wasn't in the story and the talk of rape and sexual assault itself, but it was in how the story was told. Like, we kept hearing about Pagan Kennedy's struggles to find information, kept talking about here's a dead end, here's a dead end, here's a dead end. And I know at one point in the book they talked about how this is going to be adapted for film, and so I felt like it was almost like this would act as a script and that it was like meant to be a bit more cinematic, but in book format I was like, I get it. Like you have there's like 300 pages ahead. We don't need to keep talking about how there's a dead end. I understand. After that, I just really needed an audiobook, and there had been a book that I started reading with Bear a few years back, and it's called Yes Daddy by Jonathan Parks Ramage. And this is a queer thriller mystery. Jonah is a up-and-coming playwright working at a really kind of sketchy bar where he is mostly there as eye candy to rich older men. He orchestrates, very much like a play that he would write, he orchestrates his life into another man's life, Richard, who is a very well-known playwright in New York City. Jonah figures out a way to kind of sneak into his life and kind of become a bigger part of it. Pretty early on in the book, Jonah is invited to Richard's house, kind of like this compound almost, and he's definitely one of the people there that is not rich. You kind of see a character that might try to like overlook things that are kind of dangerous and sketchy in order to kind of just go along with it, and that continues, and it becomes I didn't anticipate this to be a thriller, but yeah. And I feel like a lot of the things I read this month had a lot of really intense trigger warnings, but this one had just about anything you can imagine. I'll have a link to my Storygraph below where I will kind of list out all of the trigger warnings that I had on there, but this is definitely one that is not as obvious that it's going to go to a lot of places, and it was just like extreme. That was one of the older books on my TBR. It technically wasn't part of my TBR, but because I needed an audiobook, I looked at my list and I was like, this one technically would be up next. One that was actually on the TBR that I mentioned was A Lesson in Thorns by Sierra Simone. I gave this a 4 to 5 stars. If you can tell, I had actually a pretty good reading month. The one thing I will say is that I did not know this was part of a series, so I'm a little peeved. This is about a woman, technically a librarian named Poe, who goes back to this very wealthy, beautiful old estate. She's basically hired in to be an archivist and kind of go through the library on site. She's also part of this bigger group that used to go there when they were children. The main love interest being Auden Guest. He is the one that actually owns this castle now. I will say castle because it's more of a castle than an estate. And the book kind of starts out with Poe and Auden and their friends. There was at least 4 other people that are there as well. The book starts off with them having this kind of like childish ritual where 3 of them kind of get married. They're all like less than 10, I think, at this point. And then they never really see all of each other all at once until they're adults, until Poe comes back, and then they all kind of come back. And this ended up turning into a bit of like a poly kind of book, like everybody's with everyone. At the very end, it just kind of ends and you're like, whoa, that's not the end. And then I realized that there's more books. I think there's like 3 or 4 other books, which I'm very ticked about. So I will read those eventually, but I'm not really in a rush because this one was kind of slow paced. It felt like it should have been a quick book. Another one that is the oldest book on my TBR is Airframe. I gave this a 4 to 5 stars. This is by Michael Crichton and it was written in the 90s. This is super timely because it's actually about planes. That starts off with a really intense accident on a plane. It doesn't crash, but it basically lands and they find out that several people are dead, several people are injured, and like the inside of the plane looks more or less like a bomb went off. Like its seats are like bent backwards and there's like vomit. People are like struggling to get off the plane, and there's just a lot of mystery and weird stuff surrounding what happened. And so it's diving deep into like the aviation industry, talking about manufacturing planes as well as the regulations around manufacturing them, what happens when there's a problem on the plane, what happens if you have to report that, you need to fix it, what goes on after that. I was looking into why this is one of the only books by him that wasn't made into a movie, and it sounds like it would have been extremely expensive because they'd need to recreate the plane accident, they'd need to go through all of these extreme like measures and computerization of things. I don't know. It would have been at the time very expensive to make because of all the plane stuff. But considering this was in the 90s and in 2025 we're having a lot of plane issues pop up. Maybe it's just the coverage, but it was very interesting. Terrifying that this was happening 30 years ago and that there was a book written about it, which means that it was happening for even longer. Like, I feel like his other books, it just does make sense they'd be more exciting for a larger audience, whereas this one would probably have been more of a niche movie. Whatever. I loved it. The very last book that I read from the list was Chase Love It Wants Me by Helena Hunting, another romance author that I've read like the majority of their backlog at this point. I gave this, I never give half stars, but I technically gave this a 3.5 stars. Our main characters are Cammy and Chase. Cammy actually writes Lord of the Rings fan fiction, and like very smutty, like three-way fan fiction, and it's kind of a big part of the book. So she is very nerdy, very reclusive, and just completely antisocial, and she's obsessed with this guy named Chase who's on the hockey team. Chase is super popular, and kind of like, they're both freshmen, which was meaning this is a new adult book, which felt a little weird at times, but Chase is kind of like running through girls. I hate how that sounds, but he is really just like, he's just sleeping around and kind of like bored with being a freshman at this point, and these two run into each other, and it is super smutty. It was a super short book. It's less than 250 pages, so things kind of like happen within the first 50 pages very quickly. I enjoyed it. I think that it was another good addition to this whole like hockey universe. I definitely am looking forward to reading some more of the more adult ones in this series, because this was super smutty, but I don't like the new adultness of it. There are other books that came out recently in this like universe that are adults, which I'm excited to read. On the screen, it'll probably be a much more organized version of my TBR versus what I actually read from it. The things that I DNF'd. So I did DNF 3 of the old books. I DNF'd Firefly book 1 and 2. I realized that it is a continuation of the show and movie, and I just am so far separated from it at this point. Like, I think I watched them like 15 years ago, and I just don't care anymore, and I don't want to watch the whole series just to read some graphic novels, so I DNF'd them. It is what it is. I also DNF'd the Dominion anthology, which was, I don't remember if it was an Afrofuturism anthology, but it was definitely a Black anthology. I just didn't enjoy the first story, and it just turned me off so bad that I'm just gonna pass it along to someone else. I'm gonna trade it in at my local bookstore and give them an opportunity. I just didn't enjoy it, which is fine. The only book, so I read almost all of the new books that I have. The only book I did not read, because I'm really waiting for the ebook of it, is Everyone Who Is Gone Is Here, United States, Central America, and the Making of a Crisis by Jonathan Blitzer. I am gonna roll this over to my March TBR, and I think I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna let myself roll them over. I'll talk about it more in my TBR, but again, this is a pretty hefty book. I am on the list for the ebook. So yeah, aside from all of those, I read a few other small things. I read Dinosaurs Attack volumes 1 through 5. That's like the full run of that series, and it was fine. I don't think I gave any of them more than 3 stars, and the last one I gave a 2-star. It's basically kind of like Mars Attacks, but it's dinosaurs. There's a scientist who's able to kind of like put this laser at a point on Earth, and it'll let you see the past, but accidentally unlocks something, and dinosaurs just start showing up on Earth, and they basically just kill a bunch of people. And so that just kind of happens over and over and over again, where it's just dinosaurs everywhere for 5 volumes, and it was kind of just boring, so I wasn't super in love with it. But I think that's everything. I think that's everything I read this month. It was a decent month. That's it. That's it for February. If you check out the channel in the next few days, I will have my March TBR up, and I'll talk about the next books on my TBR for that month. But I feel like I did pretty good, and I'm super excited to continue this series. So thank you so much for watching. Let me know if you've read any of these books, and if you have any recommendations. I'm still gonna keep buying books, so don't worry. Don't you worry. I will see you next time. Bye.